I never thought it would come to this, but to him he had no choice, and he had always bragged about this moment, but I never thought it would actually happen. I stood from my seat on the 2nd of September 1996 and made my way over to Draco Malfoy. "What were you thinking?" I asked seriously but with a bit of concern. He turned from the fire. His eyes were full of dread for what was to come, and he looked almost hurt. "You've decided to talk to me then?" he questioned. "Yes," I replied, "but not until you explain yourself." I sat myself beside Draco gracefully. "I'm still in shock, you know," I spoke when Draco said nothing. "That doesn't surprise me. You will always want to dramatise things, Tayla." Draco gave me a tiny smirk through his pain. I stood instantly then. Draco and I were the only ones in the common room that night, and for the first time in my life, I was not going to feel sorry for him. Draco looked up at me as if I was crazy, and I just stared at him. "I happen to dramatise things, Draco, with good reason. You're my friend and I care about you, and this, what you're pushing aside, is something you can't handle." Draco stood fiercely and looked at me dead in the eye. He seemed like he was set to kill, with the way his eyes looked into mine. He stepped forward without losing contact, then he finally spoke. "I didn't have a choice." I rolled my eyes. "Draco, everyone has a choice. You just made the wrong one." Draco sat down again and placed his hands on his knees. "You haven't grown up like I have, Tayla." "Of course I have," I said. "My father was a pureblood and a Death Eater." I took in a short breath and regained some composure. "The only thing I haven't done is become one just like you." Draco stood angrily again. "That's because you're just a little girl." He pointed his finger at me. "And you're just a boy." I pushed his hand away from my face and looked at him, with no remorse. "Do you forget, Draco, that I am 8 days your senior? And just like you, my fellow Gemini, I have a split personality. I know for a fact that even if we had grown up together, you wouldn't be seen dead talking to me if I had ended up in Gryffindor." Draco looked sullen then. He didn't know what to think. I believe he had come to a realization that I was older than him. He also knew that I was right. His face had become a blank canvas, lost in thought. "Look, Draco, I'm willing to help you." I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "In whatever way I can." His eyes were now full of worry, and then he shook his head. "No." He took my hand lightly away from him. I watched on as to what he was to do next. "This is something I need to do on my own." He spoke in almost a whisper, as if he who shall not be named was listening himself. Draco turned his back and took a few steps away from me. "I need to prove myself. To the Dark Lord, my mother and father, but mostly my Aunt Bella." Bellatrix Lestrange, as I knew, had high expectations for everything and everyone who was pureblood, including her nephew. Although Bella's love for the Dark Lord could exceed all this. "Draco, you could die." For some reason I could feel tears welling in my eyes. Draco looked at me, with bravery beaming off his face, for the first time in 6 years. "I know that, Tayla, but this is for my family. After my father failed to receive the prophecy, I knew I would need to protect them." "And you will. But what about your friends?" I asked, stalking over to him. "To be honest, I believe you're the only friend I have, Tayla. You're here with me now. Where is everyone else?" In answer to his question, I faced my entire body to an empty abyss. That was the Slytherin common room. I then looked at Draco, with what I thought was unreadable sadness on my face. "Look, if it makes you feel any better, I'm glad you dramatise things. It shows that you really care, and that you truly are a real friend to me." That hit the heartstrings. Who else would threaten to turn Potter into a goblet?" he continued. I smiled. I couldn't believe he remembered that. I just want you to be careful, that's all," I stammered, straightening my green silver tie. "I know, and I will," he told me softly. "But now all I want you to worry about is beating Mudblood Granger and everything." I smiled yet again. Draco placed his left hand on my shoulder. Then I thought of something. "Draco?" I asked curiously, stealing a glance at his left arm. "Yes, Tayla." "Do you mind if I see it?" "The dark mark, I mean." He was hesitant for a moment as his hand left my shoulder, and I just continued to look at his arm. Draco heaved a sigh. He undid his cufflink. I watched on in suspense as he rolled up his sleeve, and there it was. I gasped at the sight of it, my mouth dropping slightly. All of a sudden, I had this instinct to touch it. I reached out slowly and cautiously. I took a quick look at Draco, and he seemed okay. It was nothing like I'd ever seen. It was like one of those ugly muggle tattoos. The flesh was still pink from where Draco had been branded. The skull, as it seemed, was staring at me, with the serpent weaving in and out its mouth. It looked painful as I traced the snake. The skin was slightly raised and bubbly, like blisters. "Oh, Draco," I murmured, trailing off. He pushed his sleeve down again, and I looked at his face, in crystal blue eyes. "All I ask is that you be careful, please," I spoke softly before brushing my lips against his snow-pale cheek. I wished him good night and headed to my dorm. As I lay in bed, looking out my window, I still couldn't help but think that Draco Malfoy was just a boy.